Hi, everyone, and welcome to Toronto Science Policy Network's talk on science communication. My name is Rebecca, and I am an executive at large for TSPN, and I'll be introducing our group before passing things on to our speakers. First off, I want to thank everyone for joining us, and a big shout out goes to the other members of TSPN who have supported and volunteered for this event. This wouldn't have been possible without all of your help and efforts, so thank you very much. And we also wanted to acknowledge our sponsor for this event, the Student Initiative Fund from the University of Toronto. So before we get started, I want to quickly mention a few housekeeping notes. On your Zoom windows, you'll see a couple options at the bottom of your screen. There's a chat function that you can use to ask questions throughout the talk, so feel free to do so whenever you'd like. And there will be a Q&A at the end of the event. There's also a closed caption option, so you should be able to go to live transcript and click the show subtitle option if you wish. And again, please note that this event is being recorded and it will be available to watch later on our YouTube channel. We also want to take some time to acknowledge the history of the lands on which we are living on. Canada is home to many different Indigenous peoples, and we ask that each of you take a moment, learn about and reflect upon the Indigenous people whose lands you are currently on. For example, many of our members reside in the Greater Toronto Area. We are located on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. It is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. So we've dropped these links into the chat, and we encourage you all to visit them to learn more about the history of the land you're currently working and living on. I'd also like to share our code of conduct. We are dedicated to providing a harassment-free event experience for everyone. We do not tolerate harassment of event participants in any form. Event participants violating these rules may be sanctioned or asked to leave the event at the discretion of the event organizers. And I'd also like to give a brief overview of what TSPN is and what it does. So TSPN is a student group at the University of Toronto, aiming to provide a platform for students, both undergraduate and graduate, along with postdoctoral researchers to learn and engage in science policy. TSPN works with the community to advocate for evidence-based policy and to promote discussion on the science behind key policies. And we do this through things like workshops, campaigns, and panels. So there's a few upcoming events I'd like to share. Our next event will be in January 2022. It'll be a panel on science advocacy with a focus on science advocacy in Canada following the 2021 federal election. So keep a lookout for that in the upcoming future if you're interested to attend or even get involved in the planning. We'll also be having an all general meeting, which all members of TSPN are welcome to attend, and that'll be happening on Monday, December 6th, 2021. So if you want to stay updated on TSPN events and projects, you can sign up to our mailing list at tspn.ca/contact. And if you're interested in learning more about our network or volunteering for future events, feel free to send us an email, visit our website, or find out more about us on social media. And we're going to be posting this info in the chat for you as well. All right, so I'm very excited now to introduce you to our speakers, Sandhya and Swapna Mylabathula, or also known as the STEAM Sisters. So when they're not doing STEAM adventures, and that stands for science, technology, engineering, art, and math, they research concussions as PhD and MD/PhD students at the University of Toronto. They've co-developed a national concussion strategy, consulted on provincial concussion policy, and co-delivered a TEDx Talk on health policy. Their work has helped to inform Canada's first concussion legislation, Rowan's Law, and they have been recognized as two of the top 50 most influential Torontonians and as urban heroes. They're outreach coordinators for Let's Talk Science, engaging students across the Greater Toronto Area and in Sandy Lake First Nation. And they engage in science communication with folks of all ages as ambassadors and science journalists for the Royal Canadian Institute for Science. They love sharing their passion for STEAM through various media channels, including the award-winning STEAM Stars, and they've launched a STEAM Career Exploration Series. And with that, I'll hand over the reins from here, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for that very lovely introduction, Rebecca.
Thank you, Rebecca, and hello, everybody. We are going to pull up our slides. One moment, please. We do believe that you can see the slides. Perfect.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having us today. Thanks again, Rebecca, for that very lovely introduction. It's a pleasure for all of us to be here with you and speak to you today.
Yes, we are the STEAM sisters. Hello. And no, you're not seeing double. We are twins. We're here to chat with you about our journey in science communication and science policy. My name is Swapna.
And my name is Sandhya. And we're both science communicators, as Rebecca mentioned, but we're also an MD PhD candidate at the Institute of Medical Sciences and a PhD candidate at the Faculty of Kinesiology and Physical Education at the University of Toronto, and have been involved in the field of concussion for over a decade.
Time flies. Together, we contribute as educators, science journalists, podcasters, Instagrammers, digital media producers, and content creators, and science advocates. That's a lot of different hats, but the connection between them is science communication.
So we started by working on proposed legislation, as Rebecca mentioned, at the federal level beginning in 2010, and consulted on the Ontario policies. And we are also longtime advocates on concussion issues, and do a lot of science communication under the banner of the STEAM Sisters. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit.
But we'll first start with our academic pathways. So we both did the exact same undergrad.
Surprise!
At the University of Toronto. We did a double major in human biology and nutritional sciences, and we did electives, the exact same ones, in archaeology, linguistics, music, forestry, and environmental sciences, and we loved all of them. Then we went on to do a non-degree year in the Faculty of Kinesiology and Physical Education because yay, exercise and physical activity.
Absolutely. As you can probably tell, we really love the variety there. But from there, I started my master's degree in exercise sciences, focusing very specifically on concussions. So I had done some work on concussion prevention, education and awareness, as well as risk factors. And then I moved on to my PhD, which I'm still in now, and I've added some layers on management and recovery.
And I went on to do 2 years of pre-clerkship, and now I am in my PhD, and it's also on concussions.
Surprise again.
And that is our academic pathway. We'll move on to the next slide.
All right, so we mentioned science communication, Rebecca mentioned it, but what is it? So here we're asking you to share with us what you think science communication is. So please, in the chat, take a second now to write the first word or few words that come to mind when you think of science communication, what it is, what challenges exist, where you find it, all those sorts of things. The first word or couple words that come to mind. Feel free to throw them in the chat now. I'm going to see if we can open the chat here. Making science accessible to all.
Love
Absolutely.
that. The accessibility of science, so important and very helpful because science is for everyone.
Outreach, misinformation challenge.
Ooh, yes, misinformation is a particular challenge, especially these days. Science journalism, a lovely way to do science communication.
And the outreach part is very close to our hearts too.
Yeah.
Science communication is about advancing science culture.
Ooh, that's a good one.
I like
nice,
that.
Frank.
All right, maybe a couple more. It's hard how to convey the key aspects of research in an accessible way. Indeed, it takes practice, but you can do it.
Absolutely. It's all about translating that jargon.
Sharing what we do with the general public and policymakers. Absolutely.
We're going to talk about doing that today.
Absolutely. Thanks, Rebecca. Okay.
Great
Fantastic.
stuff.
I'm going to close the chat for now. Feel free to throw in some more if you'd like. We're going to flip over to the next slide here. Dun, dun, dun.
Okay, so those are some really great points and really great ideas. The definition that we often use of science communication is essentially the process of taking technical, jargon-filled scientific concepts and discoveries and transforming them into accessible and understandable stories for the general public or a specific population. So all of you touched on a lot of those things. It sounds like you're all well set to do science communication.
Yeah, awesome. Awesome.
Next slide. In our adventures as science communicators, we've learned that we have to think about these 6 things that you see on the slide there. First is, what is the goal of your communication? Are you hoping to have an advocacy lens? Or maybe you're making content for children, or maybe you're doing something else, or you're doing multiple things, but what is it? You also want to consider, who are you targeting? Because your material, when you're communicating your science, will be different for different audiences. And is there an event around which you can time your content for maximum reach and exposure and impact?
Absolutely. And then you're going to want to think about what platform you're comfortable using, but also what platform are your audiences using, because you want to try and match that as much as possible, of course. And then what sources are you using? For sure, you want to make sure those are reliable sources. And then finally, think about what you love, because if you focus on that, your passion will show through and it'll come across as more genuine and engaging, and you'll have more fun.
That might just be the most important one. Okay, so what do we do as the STEAM sisters exactly? Well, everything is virtual right now. So we're going to share with you some ways that we engage in science communication with our various audiences virtually.
Exactly. So one of our science communication roles is our roles as coordinators of the University of Toronto St. George campus chapter of Let's Talk Science, which Rebecca mentioned. And Let's Talk Science is a national charitable organization that provides hands-on and engaging science activities for children and youth from kindergarten all the way to grade 12 to inspire them to explore science. And this is also our longest standing SciComm role and continues to be one of our most rewarding. We really get to work with a great team of coordinators, and we get to do a number of different types of SciComm, both in classrooms with hands-on activities, on a variety of different science concepts, as well as on-campus events when possible and safe, where youth come to visit us and look at where discovery happens.
Ooh, we also engage in public outreach, such as visiting parliamentarians at Queen's Park to share science activities. That's a lot of fun. And to engage them in conversation about why science education is important. For example, a big reason why science education matters is that it affects job prospects, how people contribute to society around them, and of course, the economy. We partner with other groups as well to do some of our special programs, such as our partnership that Rebecca mentioned with Sandy Lake First Nation, Regent Park, and Girls in STEM. And all of our activities have been modified to function in a virtual environment now so that we can continue to provide exciting science exploration activities even through the pandemic. Woo. That bit about visiting parliamentarians, that's foreshadowing a little bit. We're going to tell you a little bit more about what we do before we land on the side policy stuff.
Indeed. So during the pandemic, as you mentioned, we're doing a lot more virtual stuff. We started producing content on YouTube. So our most recent project is the STEAM League, which is a series of uninterviews showcasing a diversity of possible careers in STEAM, which Rebecca mentioned is science, technology, engineering, art, and math. Our target audience is youth and young adults. So those who are navigating what careers they want to pursue, from high school students to undergrads to grad students as well. And we don't have time for it right now, but this is from our trailer for season 1.
But we will tell you that we currently have 10 episodes recorded with some phenomenal guests covering all sorts of careers, from flight controller at the Canadian Space Agency to a former Canadian Olympian and current sport and exercise medicine physician to Canada's very first master chef. Our guests come from a lot of different backgrounds and represent a really great diversity. And season 2 and 3 are coming out soon.
So yeah, we have closer to 30 actually. Okay, so just to give one example here, we won't play this clip now, but we were able to have a wonderful Indigenous science expert join us for one of our episodes, Amber Sandy. So that is definitely one of our favorite experiences there. We loved all of them. So much fun learning from everyone.
Okay, we also do work with television shows aimed at youth. The goal there is to share content about women in STEAM careers to show youth the possibilities in STEAM, delving deeper into specific STEAM questions with programs like Finding Stuff Out and Science Max, which are both award-winning programs that air on TVO Kids, and our own award-winning digital show, STEAM Stars, on YouTube.
Lots of fun. But another possibility is news media. So here on the slide, you can see an image of where we were speaking about concussions, which is a topic that we're both very, very passionate about and is the focus of our research and our advocacy work and our policy work. So we've continued to do this, bringing this topic outside the classroom during the pandemic as well.
That's right. And we also partner with others. We mentioned this before. Building your network is a very critical step in science communication. As coordinators for Let's Talk Science, we do classroom and community group visits. We also, as a STEAM sisters, speak at a variety of events, such as the TEDx Talk that Rebecca mentioned, at the Ontario Science Centre for the International Day of Women and Girls in Science, and more recently for NASA Space Apps.
Also more fun times, but we also recently did a collaboration where we did a pandemic bake-off with this group here, baking alongside one of the runners-up from the Great Canadian Baking Show. We might not be ready yet for a real baking competition as much as we would like to be. I think we'd be best at tasting. A tasting competition would be perfect for us, but it was a great sort of unique space to share the science behind baking, and it was a lot of fun as well.
We love food science. That was wonderful to share that.
But another way to engage with audiences is through science journalism as the writer yourself.
So one of you pointed that out. Good stuff.
Excellent. And we enjoy doing this too, most recently on hockey and diabetes. Hockey's our favorite sport. But whichever thing you end up doing yourself, it's important to consider your audience because this will affect the tone that you use, the delivery of your content, and the platform that you choose as well.
Yeah, right. We also love engaging through audio formats, particularly podcasts. We have discussed our passion in physical activity and sport, concussions, and sharing science stories generally through 3 podcasts, maybe 4 podcasts. Concussion Talk, the Meeting Place podcast, Medicine in Motion podcast, and Raw Talk podcast. I think I see a teammate from Raw Talk podcast from a season that we were on. For the latter 2 there, we are producers, content creators, and hosts.
Having said all of that, our main social media platform is Instagram and becoming very much YouTube as well. And this is where we started our adventures on Instagram, specifically as the STEAM Sisters. That I think is our very first post that we have there. And we use Instagram as a platform to share all of our adventures in science, technology, engineering, art, and math. And even if it's kids content, we are able to engage with educators and others through Instagram.
Yeah, and we really like to share our content in interactive ways. We can actually do one really quickly right now. If you have Instagram, you can go to @steam.sisters. That's our Instagram. Or we are going to put it up on the screen here very quickly. We're going to switch over from our slides to Instagram so you can see one of our interactive activities called What's It Wednesday. Today is Wednesday, so what better day? You got a quick taste of it. We're going to put it back up.
Cool.
That is today's What's It Wednesday. What we do is we put up a picture, something cool. I was going to say something cool about science, but science is everywhere. So it's something cool to do about the world around us. And we ask you, what is this?
So we welcome you to do it on Instagram or throw your answers in the chat here.
Or both, if you want to see it right, if you want us to see what your answers are right now. And your options are, is that an optical illusion? Is that sky sheep?
Sky sheep.
Is that mammoth clouds? Or is it airplane trails?
What is it?
What is it?
All right, we'll give you a few seconds to do that. I think some people are doing it on Instagram. All right.
We don't want to ruin it for you, so we'll count you down. 3, 2, 1. We're gonna let you know what it is.
Should we let everyone know what the answer is today, or should we do that next week?
We'll let you know as a sneak peek to the answer. It's mammoth clouds. Clouds can come in such interesting formations. This is one of the most interesting that we've seen. Mammoth clouds look like popcorn in the sky or sky sheep. And they're really, really interesting. They often form on the bottom of cumulus clouds.
All right, so
I do believe.
We will now switch back to our slides here in a moment. So yes, that's one of the things that we do on Instagram as a regular way to engage with our audiences. So now that we've did a little bit of a taster with a little activity there. What we're going to do now is a quick activity. So if we can send everyone to breakout rooms, we'll do this in breakout rooms now, if that's okay. But what we're going to do is explain it first. So we're going to go to breakout rooms where you're going to work together in groups for 8 minutes, putting together a social media post of your own, using an image or a video, anything that kind of comes to mind. So pick something that you're interested in, a caption and hashtags. So consider optimizing your impact by using popular hashtags, asking questions in your text, and using emojis. So think about your message, what it is, how you'll hook your audience with a concise message to convey your interesting content.
And then in the last couple of minutes there, we're going to bring you back to the main room, and we're going to ask you to share your post or story with the entire group. And we recommend that you post it, but if you do want to post it, tag us at steam.sisters on Instagram or at steam_sisters on Twitter, and we'll take a look and share our thoughts. But when you are sharing, it doesn't have to be a fully ready to go post or story. It can be in progress, and we can talk about what it is that you are sharing.
Finally, we're going to talk a little bit about our science policy journey as well. So one of the first things that got us involved in science communication was advocacy on concussion needs in Canada. And this was an example of how we also went beyond the classroom as well.
Okay, so
one thing here that we can do is make public policy, which guides the operations of governments and their partner organizations, as you probably already know.
But why is policy helpful? We like to use an analogy to help describe it, and it's an analogy about cooking, which is on a lot of our minds, maybe with the festive season approaching.
Absolutely. So a policy helps us to be proactive rather than reactive, and we'd have the resources and know-how to address a situation. In this analogy of creating a feast, we'd have our ingredients and the recipe so that we can end up with something desirable like this for our non-vegetarian friends, instead of
something like this. If we don't have the resources or know-how, which in the analogy is the ingredients or the recipe or what to do with them, we might find ourselves reacting to the situation a little less than ideally and end up like poor Mr. Bean here, which is really not what we want when we're talking about our brains and concussions.
Definitely not. So in addition to helping us deal with problems in a prepared manner, policy on concussions is particularly important for vulnerable populations. Most concussion policies focus on elementary and secondary students, and that's important because 1 in 7 students in middle and high school reported a concussion, and they were more than 2 times as likely to report poor academic outcomes than their non-concussed peers.
Yeah,
Not good.
not good at all. And we can also ask the question of what's happening around the world. Well, a comprehensive survey of the global state of concussion public policy is ongoing, but so far, places such as Australia have recommendations available from government websites, and others have position statements and that sort of resources available to their populations.
But the hot spots for concussion policy happen to actually be right here in North America, and the first concussion policy was established in 2009 in Washington state. And there are now policies in every state in the US, and in Canada we started a little later, and that was actually when we started our journey in concussion policy. I'm just going to do a really quick time check. Rebecca or Dawn, how much time do we have left?
So it's 12:44 right now. So I think we probably have another 15, 20 minutes until we need to maybe move into questions.
Perfect. Just thinking about an activity that we might be doing if we've got time at the end, but we're going to go on.
Okay, so we're going to share with you our concussion policy journey, summarized by 3 F words. No, not the one in your head.
No, indeed. These are our 3 F words: find, follow, and fuel.
Okay, does anyone remember this? 2010 was a very exciting year because both Canada's women's and men's hockey teams won Olympic gold on Canadian soil. And that was fantastic because we are big hockey fans. And that's actually what got us interested in concussions in the very first place, because of stories like that of Paul Correa, who you see there on the bottom of the screen, who played in those Olympics and not long after had to hang up his skates because of concussions.
Very sad. So we found this passion of learning about concussions and found out that they impact more than just hockey. Lots of Canadians get concussions from sport, but also at work, at school, on the road, and at home. And there was no policy or regulation in place at the time to help Canadians suffering from it or their families and caregivers. So we were really excited to follow through on our interest that we found there and take a stab at drawing it up ourselves.
So we did follow through, and it was something that we found lots of people were interested in. It's a very common brain injury. And with big names like Sidney Crosby shedding light on the plight of those experiencing a concussion, it really gained traction. So after getting the insights of Canadians around the country, we did some research on gaps in policy and got a petition of over 6,000 signatures signed and traveled to share the idea.
Yeah, that was really interesting to be able to talk to over the thousands and thousands of people and getting their stories as well. But eventually it ended up as a private member's bill in 2014 in the House of Commons in Ottawa, supported by Dr. Kirsty Duncan, who is the MP who put that into the House of Commons for us and asked the government to do 3 specific things. We had 3 specific asks among the many, many more specific details there. So they were a National Concussion Awareness Week, a national strategy to address concussion in terms of awareness, prevention, diagnosis, and management, and a Center for Excellence to promote research and ongoing evaluation of the policy, as well as those continuing conversations between the provincial and territorial and federal levels.
So like communication in terms of science communication, having communication is key. Later in 2014, Ontario became the very first province to issue a policy program memorandum, number 158, on behalf of its Ministry of Education, and it still is the only province to have any provincial public policy on concussion at this level, which we had the chance to consult on.
And this policy directed school boards across Ontario to implement concussion awareness, prevention, identification, management, and training programs in their elementary and secondary schools. And while this is still not perfect, this policy was a good step in prioritizing this problem.
You see the front page of that there. And in 2018, moving along, Ontario went a step further and created legislation on concussion. This was named Rowan's Law after secondary school student and rugby player Rowan Stringer, who tragically died after multiple unmanaged concussions. Rowan's Law describes new requirements for both sport organizations and school boards.
And sport organizations need to confirm their awareness of concussion resources, establish a code of conduct to avoid that risky behavior, such as hits targeting the head, and that sort of thing, and establish a removal from and return to sport protocol for athletes to follow during recovery.
And the PPM 158 continued through Rowan's Law as a new version. We worked with the ministry as some of our recent research helped inform the new requirements for school boards. These new requirements include training and education for sport officials, codes of conduct, and concussion tracking, which is really important because without it, we can't really tell if the problem is getting better.
Exactly. So Rowan's Law has had some great reception, and there are now awareness tools from TV commercials that you might have seen to tangible tools to support education in the classroom. And while there's still a long way to go, Ontario schools and sports now have consistent expectations for addressing concussion so that we hopefully will never see another story like Rowan's ever again.
Yeah. And then just a couple months ago in 2021, it was Rowan's Law Day on September 29th, 2021. Again, there is an annual Rowan's Law Day. And researchers and policy consultants ourselves who have developed and influenced concussion policy in Canada, including Rowan's Law, we were asked to join for the announcement at Varsity Stadium at the University of Toronto, where they talked about strengthening their commitment to athlete safety.
Yep, and they are now investing up to $125,000 with the Canadian Mental Health Association in Ontario, which will be used to help raise awareness of how concussions can affect mental health and to improve education for coaches and parents of youth athletes with respect to that. So with respect to more of the psychological consequences of the injury. So in this picture here, we've got the minister from the Heritage, Sport, Tourism, and Culture Industries Ministry, and we've got the Dean of the Faculty of Kinesiology, because it was at Varsity Stadium as well. And then we've got both of us, and you can try and figure out which one of us is which.
And make it a little more difficult with the masks there, but it's really, really great that they have a focus on mental health. But all this being said, for this to have sustainable benefit for everyone, So we need to continue to fuel that concussion policy conversation beyond where it is now. So fuel is our third F word.
Mhm. And for us, fueling that conversation looks like continuing to spread the word. So that means in classrooms, through activities and outreach, through kids' television shows, through news broadcasts or social media, as well as, of course, continuing to conduct research ourselves.
So the field of concussions is still an evolving and relatively new field, so there are still many unanswered questions, and research is the way to learn more.
And part of that sustainability is continuing to drive the conversation in Parliament as well. So last year, the federal, or not last year, this is 2021, 2019.
How time flies.
The federal government subcommittee, before the pandemic in 2019, the federal government subcommittee on sports-related concussion in Canada, which is a committee that was made up of parliamentarians of all stripes, focusing specifically on concussions in Canada, had us come to talk to them about concussions.
So we came prepared with Jello brains. It was April Fool's Day after all. And recommendations on what we think the future of concussion public policy in Canada should include. They spoke with us and athletes and researchers and clinicians and put together a comprehensive report on their conclusions.
So in June of 2019, the Standing Committee published that report of recommendations for the federal government to act on. And these included the Concussion Awareness Week, the Expert Advisory Board, and collaboration between provinces, territories, and the federal government for a consistent approach to concussions, which is what we were hoping for from that earlier bill. So that was exciting.
And we don't know how all of this will look as things continue to evolve during and after the pandemic. That put a little hiccup into things, but we're pretty hopeful that we'll see something like Rowan's Law all across Canada.
So in our testimony, we covered 5 specific areas, 5 key areas here. So concussion prevention, management, policy research, education, and emerging themes in the field of concussion research, such as subconcussions.
And going a little bit further into what the recommendations were in this document from the government, we see that they reported 13 recommendations focused on 4 areas, which we're really happy to see because these are things we've been calling for since we started in 2010. So we're very happy about that. These were suggested legislation to establish Concussion Awareness Week, continued support for the federal, provincial, territorial working group on concussion in sport and organizations who work on this issue, creating a concussion research expert advisory board and increasing funding for concussion research, and enhancing collaboration with the provinces and territories to make sure that there's a pan-Canadian approach with consistency related to sport-related concussion.
So revisiting what we had written up in our private members bill and what we then recommended to the government with our testimony, we now actually have a National Concussion Awareness Week, which is in September, falling in line also with Rowan's Law Day. And that is a big win as it helps to make deliberate discussion about this topic, helping in turn with addressing some of the stigma around the injury and its effects, but also just about education and awareness around that.
Mm-hmm. There are pieces of the national strategy too that are being put in place. For example, awareness, vocational training that is happening, including what we're seeing through Rowan's Law itself for referees and team staff. However, there certainly is still a lot more that needs to be done. So it's not done yet by any means.
And finally, we touched on some of the pieces through Rowan's Law where we are seeing a type of board in place to assess impact and implementation of policy. There's a report that is released yearly on this topic specific to Rowan's Law in Ontario. And there's work being done to put in place similar policy in other provinces and territories. So we're continuing to work on this as well, and it'll be exciting to provide an update in the near future.
Okay, well, we've shown that there's a lot that policymakers can do to help address concussions, but what can the rest of us do about concussions?
Well, we all have a role to play. So in the world of healthcare, it's important for clinical trainees to have concussion education embedded in their curricula and for that to be a part of continuing education as well.
And in community sport and in schools, frontline folks who often fall through the cracks in the concussion conversation need to have access to continuing education as well, like administrative school staff and referees.
And we can all make a difference as well. So we need to see a culture shift where we can recognize concussions more, build awareness of what to do about them, create an environment where it's okay to let people know that you have a concussion and not be stigmatized for it.
That's right. And recognizing symptoms can be really helpful for families to deal with the recovery process. If parents aren't aware that irritability, for example, can be a symptom of concussion, then the recovery process is that much more difficult and challenging for both child and parent. Also important is shifting sport culture toward not accepting behavior that can lead to a concussion, like checking from behind in hockey or spearing or headhunting.
Absolutely. Okay, so I think we have just enough time now for our last activity. We're going to go back to breakout rooms, but we're going to explain it first. So in this activity, we are inviting you to start the process and think about a science policy issue that you're passionate about. So whether it be that fish example or something else, in groups, we're going to ask you to identify your science-related problem or gap, and you can build off of what you were thinking about for those posts. For social media, and then start thinking about what needs to be done. So we're going to ask you to think of one cost and one benefit of doing
That action.
Exactly, and write out just a very brief explanation.
And because you don't have that much time, if you don't have time to write out the explanation, but you just have thoughts on what that cost and benefit is for that one action that you would recommend, that would be enough. And we will ask 1 or 2 groups to share that in a tiny elevator pitch. It'll be a very short trip. So don't worry about the length of it. Try to convince everyone that your solution is necessary and the best one out there.
So thanks so much again for participating in that. And we've got our slide here. Perfect. So thank you so much, yes, again, for your attention there and your participation. We had a really great time to talk to you about our journey in science policy, and we hope that you'll be inspired to use the 3 F's to navigate your own journey in science policy. And we would absolutely love to take any questions at this point.
Yeah, thank you again. We're very happy to take questions and stay in touch. We'd love to hear from you. You can find us through Instagram and via our email, which is on the screen there.
Yeah, so anybody who'd like to ask a question, feel free to either post it in the chat and I can read it out for you, or just unmute yourself and go for it. I also personally have a question, if I can maybe open up with that. So one thing I have been noticing in your presentation is a lot of kind of mentioning of perhaps highlighting a specific example or maybe a narrative that kind of gets people more broadly interested in maybe a topic that's perhaps not as doesn't have that hook. And so I was wondering if you could talk a bit more about your opinions on that, and if you think that's something that people should always be looking to do when they're communicating their science. And particularly maybe if somebody doesn't have a topic that maybe has as good of a hook as perhaps cute animals or something like that.
Absolutely, that's a fantastic question. So storytelling is a really fabulous way to share information. And sometimes, yes, you will have some information that maybe would be a bit drier and a little bit more difficult to package as something easily kind of just something that's going to catch attention. So making sure you've got something relatable in your story, finding a way to connect with your audiences is going to definitely make that easier to package it in a way that people will want to listen to.
As humans, we connect with each other through stories, and this is something that we see across cultures. So that story is a hugely important hook. When we're talking about something like brain injuries or concussions, that can be kind of abstract because concussions are invisible, and kind of an invisible injury, unlike a broken bone, which you would see with the cast and so on. So in that example, having the personal connection of the talking to Canadians who have experienced that, they can connect to that story. It's a very frequent brain injury. So connecting that storyline to the policymakers to show that, yes, this is something that Canadians connect with. It's an issue in their lives, and this is how it's affected them. That story, that personal connection beyond the very scientific, this is what happens in the brain and this is what it looks like. You need to connect the two.
Absolutely. And in thinking of the what, the information that you're trying to share, but the why as well. Why should people care about this? If you can answer that question, you can already jump ahead within your story to make that connection with people. And sometimes we also make it more visible. So we use the Jello brains to open our talk, for example, with Parliament. And it was a very serious topic, but we use that to grab people's attention. And then we delved in. Once we got their attention, we went deep into the content of what we wanted to talk about, and framed it around the story as well. So there are different ways you can kind of create a hook, even if your particular topic doesn't have a hook already kind of very
Or
obvious.
if it's more abstract. Yeah,
Mm.
great question.
So I see we've got a question in the chat. I'll go ahead and read it out. So in pursuing a career as a science communicator, you likely have to share knowledge about topics that you don't necessarily have a lot of domain expertise or background in. Do you have any tips or thoughts on learning enough to communicate well about topics you're not an expert in?
I can think of two. One is we are genuinely super excited about all things STEAM, science, technology, engineering, art, and math. And when you have that genuine passion for learning, it's easier to convey that to the people that you're talking to. We have done that on news broadcasts, for example. We got very excited talking about dinosaurs and space exploration,
Space.
things that we don't ourselves do, but get very, very excited talking about. Having that scientific background that was helpful when you're talking to and learning about other scientific discoveries and domains. So that's helpful. And the other one is collaboration, because you're not going to be the expert in everything, but other people are experts in lots of other things. So collaborating is a very, very helpful thing when you are communicating science.
And thinking about your audience, for example, when we're working with children, we don't have to necessarily be absolute experts in the things that we're talking about. We can still share information at a level that they will understand. So just being curious, wanting to discover more helps us to really get to that level of information that we can do on our own, and then bringing in the other experts to get into a bit more of a deeper dive on that as well.
Another good question.
Yeah, fantastic question. Oh, Rebecca, I think you're on mute, but I'll just quickly add to the end of our explanation there that the learning process and the discovery process never ends for any of us. So this is
Great
just
point.
part of the continuation of that. And we really love to continue to learn. So that just really helps with that as
It's
well.
so exciting.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So we have a question about maybe some best approaches for counteracting misinformation about science, particularly, as a researcher, if it's within your field or topic that you might come across online.
Oh,
Yeah,
yes.
that's again, a very, very good question. So part of that, I think we'll start with just an ongoing presence on social media, for example. So if you're going to be presenting yourself as an expert on social media, the more you post, the more you build your audience, the more you're going to build trust with your audience, so that they know that they can trust the things that you're saying, and that you can frame that in a positive way. Some of the discussions we had today were framed and the ideas that were really fantastic, framed in positive ways. So you can use that sort of positive hook for your audiences and building trust.
Another thing is online, you're going to find a lot of misinformation. That is where a lot of it is, and it's very accessible. So the more that scientists engage online, I think this is why science communication is particularly important in this area where misinformation is so accessible. We need to make science just as accessible and even more accessible, so that we can make sure that it is there and that the general public can access it. And part of making access it is not just the frequency with which we can find it on social media, but translating jargon and technical language into something that's more digestible and accessible, as well as inviting discussion, because we need to break the barriers between the science silos and the general public, because a lot of the reasons of why we do science is because of those communities and to help those communities. So they should be part of that discussion and conversation.
Absolutely.
And they can be on social media.
Absolutely. That's a really good point. And then I'll just end that with helping provide the tools to think critically and do all of these things to everyone. So talking about what the scientific process is can help others think about that themselves, and then question, is this actually misinformation? Does this make sense? Or should I be seeking information from a different source? Should I be checking my source? So that everyone can be doing that on their own as well, and making that something that is a normal thing to do.
Sharing the process of science, sometimes we learn more and what we had thought is not true anymore. That builds trust, and is a really good way of letting everyone know that the scientific process is not, we do one thing and it's done, but there's
It's an
multiple
evolving
steps.
process as well.
Mhm.
Transparency.
We can
It's
talk
key.
forever about this.
Oh, Rebecca, you're on mute.
I think there's another question.
I've done it again. So I think we have time for just one last question. So one challenge with science communication as a high-level researcher is finding the best way to communicate at the expertise level of the audience without muddying the complexity of the topic and glazing over maybe more nuanced technicalities or debates in the literature. Do you have any thoughts or recommendations for this issue?
Ooh, that's a good one, because if we're talking about social media, often you're going to be limited to a small amount of space or time that you can share that message. So having an ongoing conversation is helpful. Taking it one step at a time is helpful. Threads are helpful, but also acknowledging that you can go to this other place to learn more. You can go to this other trusted place.
Link
to
in
learn more.
bio or something.
Link in bio, link to other things, make it interactive, videos, anything, a picture's 1,000 words, anything that you can help use to plant your information by acknowledging that some things are a longer conversation, and you can do that in other platforms or on that platform over a longer time.
But also having something like Twitter or Instagram limiting the amount of information you can post can be a really great exercise to really try and narrow down and condense what you're trying to say to a very concise message. Because depending on your different audiences, whether if you're talking to children, for example, you're not going to want to get into all of the technical details. So it takes practice. So one of the exercises you're going to want to try and do is figure out what is the core of what you're trying to say, and can you explain it in a very, very short space to different audiences. So you might want to say, okay, this is a concept I want to explain. How would I say this to children of elementary school level, secondary school level, undergraduate students, the general public, grad students, different audiences, and then try and practice and see what would you change in that explanation over those different groups. And that could be really good practice to do that.
Exercise that we didn't do today, but that we often do with audiences, is we ask you to explain a research concept, a science concept, in a very limited amount of words. And it's a huge challenge, but practice really helps.
Absolutely. The practice really makes perfect there.
Wow, thank you so much again. This was really informative. I definitely learned a lot. I think we are out of time here, so I'm just going to go ahead and share just a final closing slide. So once again, thank you all so much for being here, and thank you so much to the STEAM sisters, our speakers, and of course, thank you to the University of Toronto Student Initiative Fund for supporting this event. And finally, I'd like to mention once more that this event will be available on our YouTube channel. So feel free to check it out and share the recording there as well.